welcome to an introduction to advanced plating. So as we kind of saw before, a lot of hoards featured plated pieces like bracelets, arm rings, finger rings, upper arm rings. Most of those are made in a more typical plating pattern. So a 3x2, which is 3 sets of 2 wires, a 4x2, 3x3s, and 2x2 are the most common ones found. However, there are some pieces that are more advanced in the plate design, and they have closures that can be more ornate than what the common person would have found. So this one is designed to be a follow-up to the Introduction to Plated Jewelry class, and it will build on the lessons. So this will display some period examples and then also show you how to create your own more advanced plate styles. The terms in this class are the same as the Introduction to Plated Jewelry, but we'll run through them really quickly. So a strand or a wire is a single piece of wire. The set is a number of wires twisted together. This one will specifically focus on sets of 2. So it'll be 2 wires twisted together. A bundle is 2 or more sets that are twisted together. This will focus on 6 bundles or 6 sets. So the total bundle will be 6 sets with 2 wires each. Annealing, which is the process of heating and then cooling the material to make it softer and more easy to use. And it will work hardened as we go along. So annealing is going to be key. The piece that we're going to make today is a 6x2 arm ring. So remember, the first number denotes how many sets are in the bundle. And then the second number is how many wires per set. So in this case, it's going to be 6 sets with 2 wires per set. This method was explained to me and shown to me by Rosebud McNeil and Duke Eichbrander, and then of course modified and adapted to fit my space and the tools and materials that I had available, and to make things easier for me in my shop. The piece that is going to be shown today was made using the bronze alloy CDA 521, which is different than period bronzes, which had many of the same elements in it, mostly copper and tin, but also traces of more dangerous metals, materials like lead and arsenic. So for safety purposes, I am using modern alloys as opposed to a 100% period material. Of course, please use the proper safety gear and protection when handling, especially handling the hot metal and using the torch, as we do want to make things as safe as possible. So of course, you're going to need a few materials to get started. So first and foremost, you're going to need the wire. Just like the Introduction to Plated Jewelry and the 3x2, there are any number of wires that you can use. Bronze, copper, silver. You can use all of these to create the piece, but bronze is going to be the most cost effective. Once you go into things like silver, just like with the 3x2, it's going to add up pretty quickly. So bronze, to begin with, is the most cost-effective way to learn how to do it. We're going to be using the same MAP Pro torch, the yellow tank. Propane, of course, can be used as well, but it does not transfer heat as quickly and does not burn as hot. So I prefer MAP because it makes the process quicker and easier, and I can keep on going. The vise and vice grips are going to be utilized again today. So we're going to use the vise to clamp the sets of wires as we twist them, and then the vice grips to clamp the other side as we twist. The vise will also come into play a little bit later when we go to do the final bundle. We'll touch on that when we go to do it. For this course, we're actually going to need a sabot. So a sabot is used to clamp around the bundle as we twist it. So this can be anything as simple as a piece of hardwood with a hole drilled in the center, and then you cut it in half. The sabot is the part that gets clamped in the vise. So in this one, because we're not doing a more simple bundle with a simpler geometry, we do need something to keep this bundle nice and round. So that's what the sabot is for. In this instance, I will not be using a sabot. My vise has a hole in it already, and it's perfect for that purpose. So I won't be using the sabot, the wooden sabot. If you do not have a vise that has a hole already drilled into it, you are going to need it. That clamps around the piece as we go and keeps it tight in the anvil and allows it to twist on the core wire. The core wire is another piece that we're going to need that differs from the 3x2. So because of the geometry of this piece, we can't just twist the 6 strands like we did the 3. These are going to be built around a core wire that's going to go through the center, and then it's going to be removed at the end, and it's going to leave us with a hollow tube. You will still need the wire cutters and pliers to cut the wires and then handle the hot wires after they've been annealed or fused. Going to need the measuring tape, so we want to make the wires as close to the correct length as possible. The fire brick will be used for annealing and fusing, so it refracts the heat around the piece and makes it easier to anneal and fuse the end pieces. The bucket of water, which we will use to quench, and then the hammer and anvil, which will be used to finish the terminals at the very end. So unlike a 3x2 or a 3x3 or the more simpler and more commonplace plate patterns found in period, there aren't as many 6x2s. So the best and probably most important piece is the Halton neck ring. This one was found in Lancashire and Halton, and it does feature a 6x2 construction in silver. The ends here have been fused together, and then they've been drawn out to a really nice flat clasp with 2 hooks, so a hook on each side, and then the ends have been stamped. This piece is a hollow tube, so kind of near the center of the image, you can see where that one wire is starting to come off. You can see through there that it is a hollow tube on the inside, and it's not solid like the 3x2 is. And that's what's going to make the difference with the core wire. One of the other best examples of a more advanced plate construction is a gold alloy torque from Snedisham. So this Snedisham is more of a Celtic find, but they did use similar constructions. So this piece is a little early from the Viking Age, but still is a wonderful example of a more advanced plate style. This one is constructed with 8 sets of wires, with 2 sets per wire. And then each set is another 2 wires twisted into a set before being twisted into each other. So what you have is a set of 2 and a set of 2, and then you twist those sets of 2 together into a set of 2. So it's 4 wires total, and then you twist that set of 2 into this, you do it 8 more times, and then you twist those together in this example. So this one is a much more complicated piece than what we're going to be making today. But it is a great example of how complicated pieces in the Viking Age and before would have been made and constructed. Unfortunately, much like the 3x2 plate, we don't have a lot of evidence on how this was specifically constructed in period. Unfortunately, those methods have been lost to time. However, there is some evidence that at least one part of our modern recreations are correct. They have found evidence in quite a few of these where the sets were twisted around a core wire of willow, and then the willow was burned out. So they have found traces of willow ash in the hollow tubes. So unfortunately, since we don't know how they may have originally constructed the entire piece or fused them, we at least know that wrapping around a core wire is 100% how they would have done this in period. And willow, being so soft and pliable and flexible, was a perfect choice for the core wire. Today for the core wire, I will be using 8-gauge bronze. This is a sturdy, strong material, so I can use this piece again and again instead of having to burn it out and find new ones. But if you do want to, of course, use a willow core, that's perfect. So the beginning to this is extremely similar to the 3x2 plate. First, we're going to twist all of the wires into sets of 2. So we're going to cut out 12 wires and twist them into pairs. In this case, this was 10-inch wires twisted into sets of 2. And then we're going to twist all of those. So you end up with 6 pairs. So these are going to be our 6 pairs for the day. Once you have these twisted, you're going to want to anneal them because we want to make them nice and soft and flexible for the final twist. The next step is where things kind of start to get a little different. So we're going to take these and wrap it around our core wire. So the core wire is going to be what we use to keep this bundle together. And we are going to use, I'm going to be using a 22 gauge brass. Get that clipped here. So this part is one of the ones that takes probably the most practice and as well as time and patience. So we need to take these wires and wrap them around the core. And we want to make sure that they're nice and even. We don't want any gaps. And then make sure the ends line up as closely as you can. They don't have to be 100%, but if we can get them as close as we can. And then this is what we're going to want it to look like. So we're going to make sure that there's no gaps here where the core wire is sticking out. And once you have that, you're going to take the brass wire and you're going to wrap this end tightly. This is going to prevent these from sliding all over. And so what we end up with is this area wrapped together. Now, you need to wrap the entire bundle down the core wire. And we want to make sure this is tight as well because we don't want any of the wires to move. And we need to make sure that we keep it nice and even around the core wire. We don't want any gaps. If there are any gaps, there is a chance the core wire will pop out of those gaps and start to be twisted together. And you end up with a core that is an integral part of the twist and cannot be removed. And then we just have to scrap the project. So we're going to twist it all the way down and then wrap this other end just as tightly. And then any excess wire will just snip off a little. Okay, so you end up with this wire that is wrapped all the way down the length and has both ends tightly wrapped. So we want this wrap to be as tight as we can get it. And once it's on the core wire and it's not going anywhere, you're going to go ahead and clamp the sabot into the vise. So you're going to put the sabot around each side and then clamp it nice and tight. In this case, I'll be using the hole in the anvil and I'll clamp it down nice and tightly. And the other end gets a pair of vice grips. I use these flat vice grips. They are a little better for grabbing bigger bundles than the thinner ones. We'll make sure they're a good size. The initial wires on this have all been twisted clockwise, just like the 3x2. So on this one, we're going to go ahead and twist the whole bundle again counterclockwise. Do not over twist this one because it will buckle just like the 3x2. And unfortunately, once this buckles, we'll have to pull the core out, and then we're going to have to try again. So you want to make sure that it does not get too twisted. So we'll start twisting this counterclockwise, and we're going to twist until we get the shape or the look that you want. This wire that we wrapped is going to break, and that's okay. As long as it holds the bundle together while we twist, we don't need it anymore at the end. As you twist it, you can hear the wires start to crackle, and you may be able to hear the wrap wire starting to break. And then you go until you either get the look you want or you think you can't twist it anymore without the piece buckling. And then we unclamp it, and we end up with this, with the shape, and all of the wires have now come loose that we wrapped it. We don't need them anymore. So go ahead and unwrap these. And if you can't unwrap it, you can just go ahead and take off the chunks that are left and then just cut the rest of them away. In this case, only a couple of sections broke on me, so that's good. All right. So we end up with what looks like this piece on the core wire. We can see that we have some of the ends untwisted, which is fine. We can do the exact same thing we did with the 3x2 while it's on the core wire. Give it a little bit of a hammer while we twist. The wires should more or less fall into place. These ends are going to get fused. So if it's not 100% perfectly in place, it's just going to get melted anyway. All right, so that's a little better. We can see the ends are a little more stable here. So we need to get the core wire out. The core wire will sometimes become deformed on the inside. So gently start pulling and kind of wiggle it and twist it loose. And then perfect. So the core wire is out. So we'll set that aside so we can use that again later. And we are left with our plated piece. So it is a hollow tube on the inside. You can look right through it and you can see clear to the other side. So this is more or less the plate. You can do a few light hammer taps without the core wire just to make sure that it's in the right spots. But don't hammer too much on this piece or it will flatten because this is just a tube on the inside. And we want to avoid getting it flattened as much as possible. So once this part is finished, we're going to want to fuse it. So the fusing on this one is a little different than the fusing on a 3x2. So on a 3x2 or anything with a geometry that doesn't involve a hollow tube through the center, you can just put that right on the fire brick, hit it with a torch, and you can just anneal that and fuse it and make it flow. You cannot do that with this one. This will require a core piece to be inserted in each side that you're going to be fusing. It doesn't have to be a big core piece. This is about like 1.5 to 2 inches. That's all you need. So what you're going to do is insert it into the end, and you're going to leave just a little bit of it hanging out. So this part that's hanging out is actually going to form the anchor for our fused portion. So this will melt faster than the thinner wires, and it will provide a place for them to hang onto as it melts. We're going to get the core piece in there. So now we have the core piece sticking out of the top, just a little bit, and now we can fuse it. So the trouble with doing core piece is you have to be careful that you don't overshoot and fuse past that core piece. The core does two things. It gives it a little more bulk. So once you fuse it, it gives you a little more material to work with. So it's a nice, thick chunk of bronze. But it also prevents the tube from collapsing in on itself when you fuse it. If you fuse it without anything in there, as it melts, it's just going to collapse the tube. And that is not going to work for our purposes. So you're going to go ahead and fuse with the core piece inserted. And we want to get a nice even heat on a good portion of the piece. That way we don't lose a ton of heat off of the heat transfer once we go to fuse. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and fuse the other side. All right, give that a second to cool a little bit. All right, so now we have both sides fused. So we're just going to work on one side to begin with. Get it squared out, make sure everything is going well here. So while that cools down a little bit, perfect. All right, so we don't have to nail this because we just went ahead and did the fusing, so it should be pretty pliable. So this part is almost exact same as doing a 3x2. So first we're going to want to square out these ends. So what you want to look out for though, when you're hammering, is make sure you don't go past the fused portion. And if you do, make sure there is at least a little bit of a core piece there. Otherwise you will flatten the tube. Let's go ahead and square this out a little bit. We'll get this annealed again. Annealing this portion will take even longer than it took to take the 3x2. This is such a heavy and thick piece of bronze. It will take a little bit of time to get it up to annealing temperature. We want to be careful as we anneal it that we don't go anneal too high, because it is possible to burn through all of the wires or some of the wires. And if it burns through the wire, it creates a gap, which we'll have to basically cut down to that gap and fuse it and try again. All right, this is starting to take on more of a square profile than it had previously. So we will see if we can get this a little more square. on this one. All right. So we have the end squared out now. It is more of a square than it was. It has 4 distinct sides. It's a little bit longer than we started with. So you want to square out the other end. This end, I am not going to be squaring out. So on this one of the things that you want to look out for when you're fusing is to make sure that you have even heat around the whole piece. This one I did not, and I ended up burning the wire right here. So this is not going to be a viable end. This one will have to be cut down to about here, and then I'll have to go ahead and stick another core piece in. This is one of the things you want to watch out for, because these kinds of gaps and wire burns are frequent. They do happen. So you want to make sure it doesn't happen too badly, or you may have to restart that. So on this one, I'll just end up cutting this piece down, stick another core piece in, and then I'll go ahead and try the fuse again. A good way to try to get an even temperature, if you can, is to kind of start rotating the piece on the fire brick while you heat it, even when it's flowing. So once it starts to fuse, you can go ahead and rotate it. It won't roll off because it's going to be attracted to the heat on the piece. So it's not going to roll off on you, especially if you have the torch on it, because the air from the torch will force that molten metal up the piece. But it does help you get a nice even coating on the flowing metal, and it gets a nice even heat transfer. So we'll be focusing just on this end. From here, we can do the same ending as we did with the 3x2 terminals. You can go ahead and make these into an octagon, and then you can go ahead and round them out, but they're going to be very, very thick. There are a couple other examples in the handout, which we will not be going over today because they are extremely time consuming. They take a lot more time than it would for the class. So what you could do is you can draw it out and do a simple knot closure. That knot was found primarily in burqa. So it is, but you would draw those out to like a nice thin tendril and then wrap it around each other. Once you have it wrapped, you would go ahead and kind of try to hammer that down. So it's a nice tight joint. And that would create that nice twisted knot. You could do a rosebud closure. That one is my personal favorite. That requires a little more material and a little more time to draw out because it does have to go pretty thin. But what you would do is draw that out to a nice thin tendril again. I would say even thinner than you would use to do a knot. You want that really nice and long. And then you would start wrapping that wire around itself. The process to do that is similar to making twisted rings. You would put those, I will show you how to make one here out of copper. So you can see the process. So what you would do is once it's in that nice circle shape, those two specifically required to be shaped beforehand, and they make more of a bangle. So those two are not able to be adjusted as up or down as a 3x2 would be, or if you just do a normal plate. Those would not be able to be adjusted as well. Once you have those down, that's basically the size that it's going to stay. So when you do the rosebud, so it's in its nice round shape. We have it pretty evenly made. Grab a round object here. All right, so you would start by crossing the wires. So they're this up and down. And then you want to start rotating them around each other and around that central wrap. This may require you to do a little bit of hammer work just to keep it nice and flat. In this case, I'm going to use the horn of the anvil with the copper. And then it may require you to use the pliers just to pull it nice and tight. As you go through, you're just going to go ahead and keep wrapping around that center that continues to grow until you have the nice size that you want. And then you're going to need to wrap it around what's left of the stem here. And then once that is done, you will end up with this rosebud closure, and then everything is wrapped on the sides here. Those are my favorite to make. They do take a little bit of time, but man, are they pretty. If you don't want to do a bangle, or if you don't want to do a knot or a rosebud closure, you can also draw them down and leave them a little bit thicker. You can go ahead and flatten those right out. And then out of those flat portions, you can forge yourself a couple hooks. The hooks, one of them will go straight up and down, and then one of them will curve to the side. That pair of hooks can act as your closure as well, especially for upper arm rings, things that will go above the elbow, but absolutely for bracelets as well. That is another option that you could use, or that you can do. Hooks are a ton of fun to make. You do want to make them pretty thin, similar to how you want to do the bangles for the rosebud or the knot closures. As long as they are nice and thin and able to be bent into the hook shape, that's perfect. So some of these do take quite a bit of time to do. The longest part is drawing out the terminals and making sure that they are nice and thin and have enough length on them to do the closure that you would like. Things to watch out for as you do that is to first anneal often. We don't want the material to crack or flake or have any stress fractures appear, because once you go to shape it, that'll fall apart. That area specifically will break right off, and then you'll have to cut that part off and refuse it and try again. This specific plate, the 6x2, you can get quite a bit of length back on the terminals, especially if you draw them out. So right now, I would say this terminal we have is about 1 inch long. You can actually get at least 3 inches out of this part, depending on how long you want them to go and how thin you make it. This part you can get quite a bit back on. So if it's too short, if you wanted to do like a hook closure for an arm ring or a bracelet, and it just ends up too short because you have to cut it for any reason, you can get a little bit of that length back. You can at least get a couple inches back out of it. So there's a little more here to play with than there is with the other plated pieces. But we still don't want it to crack or flake or fracture, because that will set us back a little bit. A lot of the pieces that I do in a 6x2 are much bigger. They're larger than a bracelet would be, usually an upper arm ring or a neck ring. And so they do not fit in my pickle container. So these are going to have to be shaped prior to cleaning. The nice thing is these are pretty flexible. So they don't feel like it. They feel pretty stiff, but they are pretty flexible. And so when you go to clean it, you can open that up a little bit to get inside a little easier. It makes polishing easier. So once you're finished, the end process is pretty much the same as the other plates. So you're going to go ahead and pickle it either in a commercially available pickle solution like Sparex #2, or you can use a homemade solution, which is 2 cups water, 2 cups vinegar, and 4 teaspoons salt. That gets it just as clean. Takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and best when hot. But it does just the same job as the commercial ones, and it is, to me, it's infinitely cheaper to just use tap water and vinegar than to continually buy a commercial product. So once you have it pickled, If it's not going to fit in there, you're going to want to shape it first. Then put it in the pickle and run it through a cycle of sandpaper, 400 to 900 or 1000 grit sandpaper. If you would like to, if you want to put a really high shine on it, or if you want to get it back to a really, really high luster, you can use a buffer. Use a buffer wheel with a white or red or green polishing compound. Go ahead and hit it with the buffer, and then it'll bring it back to this really nice shine and a beautiful, beautiful luster on bronze. Always use safety when using the buffer, because it does have a tendency, if it's going at high speeds, to pull the piece out of your hands, or the rouge. It'll basically pull anything out of your hands. So just make sure you're following all safety precautions when using a buffer, and it'll bring it to a really beautiful look. Sometimes that rouge residue gets stuck in the cracks between the twists. So you may notice if you buff it with a red compound, there's going to be like red powder in the inside. If you do it with a white compound, it's going to be like a little bit of a black contrast in there. That's going to stay there no matter what, but you can at least clean the outside with a soft microfiber cloth, or you can use Dawn dish soap and a stiff brush, not a wire brush, but like a stiff dishwashing brush, to get into those grooves and clean that out. Once it is all finished, then that is it. When shaping this, we want to be careful not to exert too much pressure. It is still a hollow tube in there. So these held up surprisingly well to pressure and time, but we do want to make sure that we're not going too hard, too fast, or too much at a time, because the tube will collapse. So what you want to do is the same as a 3x2. You're going to take it in both hands, and then we're going to apply gentle pressure to get the round shape. And then if it goes well, it'll all twist at the same time, and it'll all start to bend at once. If we go too fast with this, it will start to collapse the tube. The good thing is you'll at least feel it before it starts to collapse, so you can kind of adjust how much pressure you're using. Sometimes these wires have a tendency, they may pop out, or they may start to raise above the other ones. A little bit of a light tap, extremely light tap on the anvil. Barely registering. We don't want to put any more force behind this than we have to, so we want to let the hammer do the work. So as we lift it up, just let the hammer fall. And that'll put those back in place. Once it's all shaped up and you have all the terminals and everything is cleaned, the last step, if you need to, especially if you try to get the rouge out of there, just take another round of sandpaper to it, 600 to 800 grit. Take another round of sandpaper to it, get it a nice high shine, and then you will end up with a 6x2 plated piece. This one has been drawn out to a Rosebud Closure, so it's got a nice long terminal here. But once you are finished, this will be your finished project. So that is the advanced plating. It is a little more time consuming. It takes a little more wires, which is why this is a little more costly for silver than a 3x2 plate would be. Specifically, if you're looking at how thick to make it, 14 gauge bronze is plenty thick. This comes out a little under ½ an inch thick, which is pretty big actually. I wouldn't go any higher than a 12 gauge bronze. Anything over that is going to be really, really thick and heavy. It's going to be a little harder to maneuver and work. But these are a little more time consuming. They're a little more advanced. They are definitely more fun to do, in my opinion. They are my favorite plate pattern, and I love to make them. But the end result on these, even though they're a little more time consuming and they're a little more labor intensive, the end result on these is absolutely gorgeous. The plate pattern makes a beautiful and complicated twist as it goes around each other, and I just think it looks absolutely stunning. The Halton neck ring was one of the first pieces that really drew me to Viking Age jewelry and really made me want to start doing plated pieces so I could learn how to do it. And they are just absolutely stunning in person. So I love to do the 6x2 plates. I've made a couple of them, and they are beautiful. They're a great pattern. They're fun to make. They're a very complicated look to the eye, and I think it works very well with the symmetry of Viking Age jewelry. So, any questions?
Yeah, could you show, you did the Rosebud when you actually were doing it in class, but I think I missed because you were holding it in the wrong viewer, and I was on the wrong screen, so I didn't.
Oh yeah, no, let me grab the copper here, and I'll do another one. Bear with me.
Oh no, can you just show the finished version?
Oh,
I understood the technique, I just didn't see the finished version.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. It is my favorite one to make. It takes a little bit of more time to get these out to that really nice thin tendril, but they were gorgeous in period. There's a couple pieces that have them, and they are stunning. So I love making these.
My other question for you, is there a ratio of how long you want to start with to, like, with the wires that you're cutting, to how long the finished piece needs to be? Because
Sure.
Obviously as you're twisting it, it's going to get shorter, but then when you're drawing it out, it can get longer. And
right,
like, is there a ratio or a
I will be honest with you. If there is, I don't know it. A lot of it's trial and error. I have not found one that works consistently because each twist is a little bit different. Generally speaking, if you just want to do a bracelet with terminals, you'd like at least an inch gap. So if it's a 7.5 inch wrist, I would shoot for somewhere between 6.5 to 7 inches in total length before you shape it. If you want to do a bangle, they would measure around to the thickest part of their hand. I've measured a few people, and I found that for the most part, between the wrist and the thickest part of the hand is about a 2.5 inch difference. So my wrist is 7.5 inches, and the thickest part of my hand around like the thumb and the back of the hand is 9 inches, or 10 inches. And then, so you want at least the inner circumference to be big enough to slide over that for a bangle. As far as finished length goes for that, I would shoot, because you're going to lose quite a bit of length as well when you shape it and then make the rosebud or make the knot. I would shoot for about 3 to 4 inches above that. So if you're going for a 10-inch inner circumference, shoot for 14 in total length before you finish it, and then give it a try. If you need a little bit more, or if you need a little bit less, you can always draw it out a little bit more, or make the knot, wrap the knot a little bit longer around the stem. I just do not know a foolproof formula on how long to make those to fit each specific wrist.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sorry.
No worries. I was trying to do the same thing, trying to figure out ratios for trichinopoly. How long to do my weave?
Oh, yes.
To when I use my draw plate, to how long I'm going to get. And I'm like, I have a million charts basically of if I do 6 strand, if I do 8 strand, if I use this kind of core. And so, yeah, but okay, awesome.
I have never figured that one out either. Like I guesstimate that like an 18-inch before you draw through the mandrel, or before the draw through the draw plate, will be like 28 inches. But of course, it all depends on like wire thickness and everything else. So it's one of those things that I really wish I had survived in at least oral history. Is Viking Age jewelry techniques and construction methods, because they were masters in it. I really wish it had survived the times, but unfortunately not.
we're stuck piecing it together for museum artifacts.
Exactly,
and-
yes.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to head to my next class. Thank you so much. This is
Thank-
awesome.
thank you. Have a great day, and thanks for coming.